Hello, everybody, and welcome to Bolivia Political Crossroads, episode number 64. Today is Saturday, July 17th, 2021. Hi, Ernesto.
Hi, how are you doing, Paul?
Excellent. Doing good.
Good. Summertime?
It's still summertime up here, yeah. Yeah. We hit 36 yesterday.
Wow.
But yeah, it doesn't feel like it. Doesn't feel like it.
Because it's so dry, right?
It's dry, yeah. I mean, you don't want to be standing in the sun at 3 in the afternoon for half an hour or anything like that, but it's not as intense as when you're in a place that's really humid like Florida or Santa Cruz or whatever. When I was in Vegas, I didn't tell you this last night when we talked on the phone. The day I was in Las Vegas, it was a week ago, it got up to 45, which is like 100. Yeah, it was like 115 degrees. It was ridiculous. Even if it's dry, that was just too much, man. That was just like, my friend was telling me, he's like, yeah, you should come to Vegas and try to find a job here and this. And I'm like, no thanks. He's like, it's only 2 months a year. I'm like, that's 2 months too many. But it was pretty ridiculous. So,
yep. Yeah.
But yeah, down there you got a little cold snap going, right?
Yep, we have a cold snap here. Yeah, it is too much for me, but well,
too much for you.
Yeah. It's too humid, you know.
Yeah.
You know that even if it gets like 15 or 14, it feels cold here.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the situation. It's not really cold, but it's like that 14, 15. So it gets uncomfortable, to say the least.
I like that weather. But anyway, that's what it's like in Seattle most of the year. So we'll get started. We've got a few different topics. One that's mostly local, another one that's I guess you'd say bi-national. The scandal with Argentina and Bolivia with the anti-rioting munitions, and then a case that's not a Bolivian topic, I suppose, but it's definitely relevant, which are the protests in Cuba that have been going on for the past few days.
It's not directly relevant. It's not directly affected Bolivia, but it's so relevant, because it became part of the political discussion the whole week,
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's worthwhile talking about it because not only in Bolivia, I think in the whole Latin America, this whole issue about Cuba and the victimization of Cuba.
Because the embargo.
It became an important topic this week. So Let's talk about it.
Sure. To give a little bit of background to anybody who's not paying attention, it's been about a week. I don't remember the exact date, but basically in a country where you can't protest, the last time there were any significant protests in Cuba was in 1994. That's
correct.
Almost 30 years ago. And so that tells you something.
Yeah.
Because of, from what I understand, basically food shortages, medicine or shortages of medications, a rise in COVID cases and deaths. I guess the situation became desperate. That people felt desperate enough that this was all they could do, and they were, taking serious risks in doing so. At this point, there've been hundreds arrested by the official Cuban government numbers, 1 death, and sorry, I have an NGO whose name I didn't jot down that reported at least 5 deaths at protests, which is a significant number, in such a short time and in a relatively small population. And so, going into where this would be relevant politically for the rest of us in Latin America. I mean, the only person I saw expressing support to the Cuban regime directly was Maduro in Venezuela. Big surprise. I don't know, and I'm not down there, and I haven't honestly kept up as much as you probably have on this, what the official position is in Bolivia, if there has been any kind of public statement made.
Oh yeah, not so much from the president, from the real president. I mean, from the official president.
Yeah.
The real president, yes, he has said something. I mean, Evo Morales has expressed his absolute opposition to the embargo.
Mm-hmm. Well, but that's nothing new.
No, nothing new.
So talking about the embargo, so do you think it's just an attempt to, well, you said this, I don't know if you said this at the beginning of the recording or before, but the victimization, it's the, how do you say, they're spinning it. That's the word.
Right.
Where, instead of focusing on the protests and why the shortcomings of the Cuban government or regime, that they're spinning it to take attention off that and oh, the embargo, this, the embargo, that. The embargo, my personal opinion is the embargo is not a good thing, but regardless, I think the issue goes deeper than the embargo.
Yeah, it's a very complex issue, and I think it's fascinating to be able to speak it out loud. On the one hand, something that really came out in Bolivian news, in newspapers and in the TV, is that yes, the protests came out as a result of the poor situation, health situation, the COVID situation, and food situation. But what was very interesting, I think it's salient, it's good to point it out, that in the expressions of the people in the streets was libertad, no? And that was stressed pretty much in Bolivia, and I think in the whole Latin America. People want freedom, and I think that is important. It's not just material things, It's not as if you would take the vaccine tomorrow to Cuba and they would all be happy, There was a big stress. I think it's a political issue. Yes, it is, but once again, I think it's not a senseless issue. Freedom. These people, I'm sure, want freedom. I'm pretty sympathetic to that position, and I think they're correct when the analysts say that there's a lack of freedom and these people want freedom. I think they're correct. It's not just a material issue, and well, it's a political issue on that part of the analysis. On the other part of the analysis, okay, what is the perception of the embargo in the world? I think in general, it's a negative perception, of course, If you look, I was looking at the UN, they're having votes at the United Nations ever since 1992. Every year there are votes. And every year there's a condemnation to the embargo, specifically to the embargo on Cuba. And the number of countries that vote against the resolution of the United Nations that condemns the embargo is basically, it's the United States, which are the victims of the resolution, and Israel. Those two, those are the only two countries that have been permanently defending that position. Last year, Brazil voted in favor. No, there were three, because the president of Brazil is in that position now. But in previous years, there were other countries that go in and out of that position. But basically, the only ones that are permanently defending the embargo are the U.S. and Israel. The whole rest of the world is against it, and well, that has to tell you something. That's very important. The whole world is against it, and that's very interesting. On the one hand, on the other hand, when you get into the, not the details, but some detail of the embargo, at first the argument is that the embargo only affects U.S. businesses. It's the U.S. companies that cannot go and do business with Cuba. But then you discover that during the late 80s and the 90s, there were sanctions against other countries' businesses that would get in Cuba and that want to do business with the U.S. that would be affected.
Okay.
If you're a Spanish company and want to get into Cuba, but also you want to do business in the U.S., then hold on, you can do that, because if you want to do trade with us, don't do it with them. That's what really sparkled the issue, because it was just unmanageable. People in the world, the business community could not put up with that quote unquote abusive position. You're nobody to tell us what to do. Okay, that I think really sparkled a lot of insatisfaction in the world. And then if you look at the whole spectrum, Gary Hart, that was his name, right? The politician, Democratic guy, Gary Hart. Yeah, that's
From
from the Democratic Party in the U.S. Gary
I'm not
Hart
sure.
was a yeah he was a candidate to the presidency sometime in the 90s, I think. He said something very interesting, you know, and it's today it's still valid. He
Mhm.
said, "This is not really about communism," he said, you know, because the U.S. has had a whole different position with respect to other communist countries, such as China. You know,
Mhm.
ever since Kissinger went to China, the whole China issue changed 180 degrees. You know, because the U.S. opened everything to China. All the business barriers were totally destroyed, and business started upsurging until now. And you still have a communist regime there, a communist regime that violates human rights every day.
Yeah.
So I think that's a valid criticism to the embargo. He said it has nothing to do with communism. It has everything to do with political positions of the Cuban American population in
And
Miami. Yes, because those guys are too many and they influence politics in Florida and in the United States very importantly. So they are the ones who swayed the opinion of politicians, both for Republicans and Democrats, in getting into this embargo, which he says it's senseless. And I think it's a very valid position. Getting away from Gary Hart, I think that history has shown us something. You know, I don't know if it's my theory. At least I haven't read it anywhere else, but we have seen it in the world. If you put money in Cuba, more and more and more money, and people get rich in Cuba, do you
Mhm.
think they're going to be communists? You know, that's how communism fell in Europe. You know, because once people started smelling money, and people in Russia and people in China started having money, where is communism today? You know, where is
Yeah.
communism even in China today? You know, as a theory, as an ideology. What I think is that in China you still have an autocracy, you still have a non-democratic regime.
Right.
But I don't know if you have a communist regime, you know,
No.
in the Marxism or in the terms of Mao Zedong, you know. I don't think so. I don't think they're there. So I think money is the enemy of communism. I think what really destroys communism is a large amount of money into the Cuban economy. What you'll have as a result after 5 or 10 years is a lot of rich people in there, and a lot of
Mhm.
rich people that are probably not going to abide by the communist rules. Rich people that are going to have a lot of influence in the making of laws, and rich people that are going to be pushing for more liberal, not only economics but politics. My
Well,
feeling is that
that
this is
just
wrong.
sorry to touch on that just for a second. You know, I pretty much agree with everything you're saying, and it makes sense to me.
Mhm.
But in terms of money going into the Cuban economy or being injected, you know, the United States isn't alone in the world. I mean, from what I understand, I haven't been to Cuba, but from what I've been told by people from there and people who visited, is you know, there's money that comes in from mostly from Europe, right?
Right. Yeah.
They invest heavily, especially in tourism, and
Hotel.
so I mean, it's happening. It would probably happen on a much larger scale
Oh yeah.
if the largest economy in the world that's only a few miles away was
Sure.
also participating in that. But yeah, I don't. I guess I don't know to what extent. Um, you know, maybe it end up similar to China, where in the sense that there's an open economy, but an autocratic government. You know, if it became fully, you know, the communist factor or element would just be part of the rhetoric and not actually part of the system, at least the economic system, right? So,
Mhm.
um,
But see, I think that the problem that the U.S. would have and it's a natural problem. It's not an ideological problem whether these guys are communists or not communists. If they're working, if they have businesses there, it's fine, you know. But I think the big threat to the U.S. Because Cuba is so cold, so close, is that there are nuclear arms there. You know, I think that would be the only thing that really the United States would have to take care of is the whole nuclearization of the island. You know, and that's possible to control because there are ways to control that, especially since it's so close. But other than that, I think that it's just workable. But I agree, you know, I think it's just the people that live in Miami that have become extreme rightists, you know, and fascists almost, you know, the Cubans that are in Miami that have influenced so much in the American political society that nothing is being able to be done with Cuba itself, you know, with the government of Cuba, because these guys are just opposing everything, you know, without any good reasoning, you know, because they're just hurt by what happened in 1959. Yeah.
But what's I guess what's strange to me, considering that definitely the Cubans in Miami influence politics on a local level or on a state level, I'd say in Florida, on a massive scale. But once you go, you know, up to on a national scale, you know, when you have a Democratic president in office, then why would that still be the case? What I mean, what I'm saying, I guess, is the Democratic
question.
Democrats aren't beholden to the Cubans in Miami on the right. See what I'm saying? They're, you know, they.
But you do agree that locally they are very important.
Oh yes, without question.
If you have them as an enemy, political enemy, I mean, you could lose Florida, right?
Sure, and which way did Florida go this last election? I can't remember. Florida stayed red, right?
Yeah, but they swayed.
It could be close, right?
But the important thing is that they are important. Correct?
Yes, they are. Yes. So I guess if you're playing the long game, you have to keep them in mind.
Sure, because you can't lose Florida, right? It's a big state, yeah. So no political party, neither of them would like to lose Florida. So in order not to lose, even though they're not important in Arkansas or in Missouri, you know, because there are no Cubans or there are very few Cubans, you know, you cannot allow yourself to lose Florida. So in order to do that, you do whatever they want to do. And yes, they influence national politics in that sense, you know, because Florida is such an important state in the counting of electoral votes that they're not willing to lose that state. You know, neither
I get it.
party.
Yeah, you make a valid point. They're just, you know, it's not like, oh, we won, we're in, and who cares about Florida now? They're from the day they get in, they're thinking about 4 years down the road.
Yeah, because they have Congress elections and then they have local elections. No, it's too big of a game. Yeah, Florida is too big of a game.
In speculative terms, do you have any idea of where this is going to go? I mean, my suspicion and my suspicion is that it's going to fizzle out and things will be business as usual. I mean,
wow,
that's
no, I don't think so.
No,
because I think my perception, and I hope that I'm not wrong, my perception is that the regime in Cuba is weaker as a result of two things, basically. One, the Castros are not, well, Fidel is not there anymore. And his brother, although he's still Castro, has never been as strong as Fidel. Has never been a leader as strong as his brother. But even now, he's old. He's too old, you know. Even Raul is very old. So the party basically rests on the leadership of the non-Castro fellows, you know. And I think that that has had an influence, or is having an influence presently, a very important influence in the island, because on the absence of these two brothers, what's the future, the political future of the island? My feeling is that what we have been seeing, because I hadn't seen, well, maybe it's because of technology, but in the 90s, I haven't seen something like what I've seen yet, or this last couple of days.
Mhm.
Flocks of people in the streets, just as too many people in the streets, you know, and they're not scared. And that's because people are sensing that the government is probably either they're too desperate, but even if you're too desperate, you don't go out like that in the streets. Maybe one crazy guy would do it, but not
Yeah.
so many people, you know. My feeling is that these people are smelling that the government is not a, they're testing the government. They're testing to see how far they can go.
Mhm.
And I think that is what we're going to discover now. If the Cuban regime doesn't want any more of this, they really have to repress people because there were too many guys out in the street. So that means they would have to imprison people, kill people, and that would stop. If they don't do that, this would tend to grow
You
because
think so?
then, yeah, because then the people would sense that, hey, you know, we have a chance. These guys are
Mhm.
not as strong as they were before. Without Fidel, without Raul, forget it. This whatever his name Diaz is not as strong. So they would keep going out to the streets, and then things would get more complicated. And that, in my opinion, is what will probably happen in the near future. People are going to be testing the water in Cuba.
I'd like to think
In
you're
the
right.
world.
That,
In the
that is
world.
that is reoccurring. Um, I guess
Internet,
my what's that?
internet is going to change the whole thing
If yeah,
because
if they can if they can if they
yeah,
can
but see,
keep.
that's the point. That's the point because I think that the U.S. is planning on restoring internet service, full internet service uh, from the U.S.
They
Right?
can override. Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
Apparently, they can do that. See, that's a technical issue again. You know, if they have the way through a satellite to reach the island, then the people are going to be connected to internet,
Right.
whether the regime likes it or not,
Uh-huh.
and that could make a change too. Yeah.
No, I guess my initial um thoughts or reactions to this and why I'm not so optimistic are based on, this has been going on for a few days and it seems to be just kind of dying out. At
Right.
least that's I mean, maybe it's because there's not as much information getting, I don't know. But it doesn't seem to be getting the coverage that it was 3 or 4 days ago at
Right.
all.
Right.
It's just kind of, oh, people have forgotten.
Yeah,
I don't know,
you could
you know.
be right. Yeah, you could be right. Let's see what happens. But my feeling is that what I just said. Yeah. Mhm.
I'd like to think that you're right.
Yeah. Let's see.
um, Moving along, this
Uh,
scandal. Okay, so this is anybody who's not from Bolivia or keeping up on Bolivia probably hasn't heard about this, and it's a confusing topic. This topic of the let's see how to summarize this. So what we've got going on in between Bolivia and Argentina right now is a scandal based on the fact or the accusation that the Mauricio Macri, the former Argentinian president, during his administration in November, days before Evo Morales resigned in November 2019, there was a shipment of anti-rioting munitions, like gas grenades and tear gas and the like, shipped to Bolivia and supposedly not following the correct protocols for importation of those materials. And so what we're seeing right now in Argentina, and this was based on an accusation or from present ministers in the Fernandez administration in Argentina, accusations against two ex-ministers and Mauricio Macri himself for illegally shipping or exporting these munitions to Bolivia. In Bolivia, at the same time, you're seeing at least one person being indicted. He's the ex-commander of the armed forces, Jorge Terceros,
right.
who was supposedly the canciller is like the Secretary of Foreign Relations. Is that how you?
Secretary of State.
Yeah, Secretary of State. Presented as proof a letter supposedly written by Jorge Terceros thanking the Argentinians or whoever was in charge on the Argentinian end for the shipment. Now, Jorge Terceros points out that this letter he didn't draft this letter, and that it was dated the day after he resigned. He resigned on November 12th, and the letter is dated on November 13th. But again, there's some really strange shit here, because Macri is no friend of Evo Morales, and Evo Morales hadn't resigned yet. And so why would the Macri administration be sending anti-rioting materials or gear to the Bolivian government while Evo's still in power? And at the same time, with the timeline the way it is, it's so close to the dates where he resigned. So if this was to support the future government, the interim government under Áñez, you know, as a favor, let's say, I guess that's what's being implied here, right?
Right.
But I guess if you're going to try to give somebody support as quickly as possible, you're not going to wait and see what happens. You're going to, because from the day it leaves Argentina to the day it shows up in Bolivia, it's going to take a few days or a few weeks or whatever, right? To go through all the proper channels and everything. So, you know, that if you want to believe that theory that this was Macri trying to help Áñez, which is what I think the Masistas in the Arce government is trying to push, and also on the Argentinian side, the same thing,
right?
Then I guess that sounds reasonable. But yeah, it's an interesting topic, and I guess at this point, all you can do is speculate, you know. And there are things that just don't add up. I mean, it's been sitting in a police warehouse basically for like a year and a half, and the police have no idea. Like, they don't have any paperwork to say, you know, when you take an inventory, there's, you know, you've received the inventory, there's paperwork that's in place, right? And there's none. So it's a strange case, to say the least. And what you are seeing is, we talked about yesterday, is there seems to be simultaneous collaboration, I guess, on both sides, in Argentina and Bolivia, to kind of get the ball rolling on these indictments, right?
Right.
So
yeah. Okay, I think that this whole thing started with the accusation that what was sent were arms, not gases.
well, there's cartridges. I looked this up because in the press is very the press is the press. A lot of times they give information that's unclear. They don't even understand it. They just print it. And everything I've seen, it says gases lacrimógenos, tear gas, gas grenades, and it says cartuchos AT 1270. So cartridges, AT 1270 cartridges. Now these cartridges, the AT 1270, when I look online, all I can find, 1270 is a gauge, but I don't know if these are like for rubber bullets or for what they're for, or if they're for actual, like, because like 12, those, when you look online and look at the 1270 gauge, they look like shotgun munitions, right? So I don't know, but I mean, I don't know what the AT stands for. I couldn't find that out. But I don't know if they were, initially that was the charge, right? That these were actual live munitions, lethal.
Right. That's what I recall. The first charge that appeared on the newspapers was that they had sent arms or ammunitions, not gases. And then, as in the second phase, the truth comes out and it says, oh, but it's not arms, it's gases, which is a whole different ballgame, right? Yeah. Because the first implication when it's arms is they brought those arms in order to kill people. Yeah, that's right. Which is a whole different ballgame. They brought those gases in order to diminish the
crowd control. Let's say.
Crowd, yeah, that's it. You know, that's a whole different ballgame. You know, but that's why I pointed out that at the beginning, this whole thing had the intention, at least the intention, of tying this to Sencata and in Cochabamba, right? Killings of people. But that didn't resist 12 hours, you know, because after 12 hours, somebody read the like you know, somebody read and said, hey, you know, these are not arms. These are not weapons. These are not bullets. These are just gases. So, oh, really? Yeah, but still blah 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 blah. Now we're talking about gases. So my question is it illegal to bring gases into Bolivia? I don't think so. I think
they're all imported. Bolivia doesn't produce
right.
their own tear gas. Yeah. It all comes from somewhere else.
Right. So it's not. It doesn't necessarily have a criminal finality, a criminal objective. The objective is what you just said. Yeah, no, the objective is just if you see a crowd of people that are protesting in the streets, and what you do is you
disperse them using these materials.
That's it. It's not a criminal. It's not a criminal act. That's what I mean. It would be different if they would be bringing, I don't know, bullets or something like that. Why were you bringing bullets? What was the intention of that? Oh, because we're going to have a war with Brazil. Oh, okay, I understand. We were going to beat Brazil through army. No, that's not the situation. It's not the situation as we're bringing all these bullets to kill people in El Alto. No, they weren't, because they were just gases. So now the whole discussion is like all these political discussions. Finally, nobody knows what the discussion is all about. Because it's so complex, whether the letter was forged or not. That's an issue, because it's still an issue.
Yeah.
Nobody believed. Half of the people in Bolivia believe that was forged. Half of the other people, the Masistas, believe that that's a true letter. So the discussion is no longer the real thing. The real thing is what happened actually. If they brought gases, I myself don't see too much of a problem. Because, as you mentioned, gases are always bought in Bolivia, and they're bought for the reasons gases are made in the whole world.
Well, hold on. Here's the thing, and I don't know how great an offense it would be. Like, generally, gases, tear gas, and those things are imported, or exported from their origin by a private seller, not by a government. I mean, well, I don't know if I can say generally, but at least in Bolivia, to the best of my knowledge, that's the way we receive them, are from private,
that's
private
how
entities.
Got in jail, because he was a private business.
Exactly. That's now. The issue here is these aren't coming from a private seller. They're coming from the Argentine government. Right. And why would the Argentine government want to help Evo Morales contain protests protesters that are trying to get Evo Morales out of office? When Macri's and Evo were I don't want to say they're sworn enemies, but I mean, Argentina wouldn't let Evo's escape plane fly over their territory. He didn't go to Argentina while Macri was there for a reason, right?
Right.
So what I'm getting at here is that, posing that question, it seems obvious to me that the Macri administration knew beforehand. Again, this happened apparently the process got started 3 days before Evo resigned. And this would indicate that the Macri administration knew that the next Bolivian leader was going to be someone from their side of the political spectrum on the right. So that they were privy, the Argentine government was privy to information that the Bolivians didn't have, right? Because according to Agnes and everybody else, nobody knew she was going to be president until the day before she was sworn in, right? Nobody had an idea. But if you look at, if you read between the lines on this, it would kind of lead you to draw to other conclusions, or at least suspicions.
That's fascinating. What you're saying is just fascinating, because if that's the case, and it could be the case, then that's interesting, Then, they were preparing the field in order to
like, hey, shit's going to hit the fan, and we're going to have Agnes or somebody on the right in here, and all the leftist Masistas are going to be making life difficult for this right-wing government, if you will. So please, with our foresight, we are going to need extra help with anti-rioting gear and munitions to keep the crowds back.
That would mean that they would have to be writing letters, right?
there would
to
have to be
people
some
from
kind of,
Cuba.
I don't know, again, that there's no paperwork on this stuff.
There's no
At least that's the claim. So it could just be phone calls.
Yes.
So
Very interesting. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it could. It's speculative, but
it is
it's
speculative. But I mean, because the investigations is getting started, and really, unfortunately, how much can you believe from an official investigation?
Yeah, correct. Yeah, neither in Bolivia nor in Argentina,
No.
because they're politicized. They're too politicized. Yeah.
Mhm. But I mean, what is, I guess, unquestionable, or at least what seems to be pretty clear, is that this stuff is stored somewhere and there's no documentation for it. Unless, of course, you know, again, going back to the lack of trust in the system, you know, whoever the police officers are in charge of maintaining inventory, somebody could have said, hey, don't show anybody the paperwork for this. Otherwise you lose your jobs, you know, that kind of thing. So
was this paid business? Do they have the payment, the amount of money that Bolivia paid for this or not? I haven't seen it. I asked.
No, they haven't mentioned anything about amounts, or, you know, if this was a donation or if this was a purchase.
But that's an interesting aspect of it, you know, because if it's for money, then we would want to know how much was paid for it, and whether it was the actual business amount, or whether there was like Murillo, right? Somebody paid millions of dollars for a couple of gases, you know, and let's see what happened there. So the money issue would be interesting. If there's no money in the transaction, it's even worse. Your theory is more has more credibility, because then it was just given, you know, you guys will need these gases, do it, you know, you have our support for doing it. So the money is no small deal. I haven't read anything about payment, and I think we have to know, because whatever happened, whether it was all done under, or partly done under Evo and partly done afterwards, the money issue is crucial here. We have to know whether Bolivia paid for that or not. It probably did, because these are sales. There's no, not even, usually governments don't give out things, you know. It's probably sales. But we'd have to know how much it cost, who paid for it, you know?
Yeah.
When was it paid? How much was it paid? When? Because usually it's not only one payment. You pay half of it at the beginning and half of it at the end.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
There's a lot of speculation you can do, but I think it's a topic that on its face, people look at it and go, what's going on here? I don't get this. And even I was, you know, you look at the headlines, you're just like, what the whatever, you know, you don't want to give it too much time, because it just doesn't even make any sense or be that newsworthy. But then as you kind of start to ask the questions, it's like, hey, wait a minute. So I guess we could probably follow up on this next week.
I think
we
so.
have more information.
I'm a victim of what you just said. You know, I really didn't pay too much attention, because it looked so stupid. You know, this guy, well, the letter appears, and then the guy says, I never signed the letter. I believed on that, you know. I believe that they say, yeah, he didn't sign the letter. How can the Canciller of Bolivia is forging letters from the former comandante?
Yeah, and here's a question: like, why would, if you're bringing in that kind of material without doing the proper protocols, why are you going to send a thank you letter on like a subvert? What do you call it? A covert operation? As you call this covert ops, right? And then you send the guy a written thank you letter. Fucking that seems pretty ridiculous. Yep. And the guy who became the commander of the Air Force probably wouldn't be that stupid, you know. I mean, anyway. So yeah, it's definitely it's entertaining to kind of try to play out the different scenarios here and stuff. But anyway. Do you want to keep going on that, or kind of leave it there for now?
No, because I think that was enough. But I think that the points that you brought up and that I brought up are important, because even if it's just so stupid, you know, like the last point you made, then it's worthwhile commenting, because people cannot be absorbed in a story that is stupid, you know. And I think that basically we're talking about that. My feeling is that this was forged, the letter, I mean, and that well, let's see, you know, that's my feeling, that it was forged, and that the government is forcing the whole thing, you know, and that they're forcing the Argentinians to follow up in order to straighten the whole thing, because it's important. That's again, because if it's shown, if it's proved that the government of Bolivia forged that letter, that's a minus point for the government, a very bad thing politically speaking.
Yeah,
internal.
Well, they're doing forensics on it, but where do you think the Bolivian government's going to send it to do forensics?
To Nicaragua or to Venezuela?
Yeah. So, it is what it is.
Yeah, that's how it is, man.
Final topic. So good news on COVID, I guess. So the case numbers are dropping. This third wave, which was the worst we had, we seem to be over the crest, right? And
Right.
Yesterday in Santa Cruz, there were 368 cases.
Yeah.
So we're doing better than before. We're in 600, 700, 1,000, whatever.
Yeah.
There's still people dying. That's still happening. The numbers are kind of sporadic on that. But what is definitely happening is that the vaccines are being administered at a much higher rate than before. Last time we did the show a couple of weeks ago, we just gotten, I think, a couple million doses of Sinopharm. The U.S. government sent almost 1.5 million doses of Johnson & Johnson, which is convenient because it's a 1 dose instead of 2. And
Right.
Bolivia so far has been having difficulty getting second doses of the Sputnik, which is the one that most people have been getting. You know that very well.
Yep.
And so yeah, but at this point in Santa Cruz, at least somewhere near 40% of the population, or the applicable population, has received their first dose of whatever, the Sputnik or the Sinopharm. With this Johnson & Johnson with 1.5 million doses, that's significant, because in a population of 10 million, that's already 15% of the population right there.
Right.
In the general population, we talk about the vaccinatable, is that a word? Vaccinatable population. Vaccine eligible, I guess would be the correct term, population. I'd have to guess that number is somewhere closer to 7.5 million, right? Like registered voters, people who are 18 and over. The Padrón Electoral is 7.5 million. So
Right.
let's say that the eligible vaccine recipients are also 7.5 million. So 1.5 million is actually closer to like what? It's like 28% or something. So just when we talk about Johnson & Johnson, point being that we're finally getting vaccines. There seems to be a much higher supply at this point than there is demand. We're starting to see numbers go down, probably due to the fact of the higher vaccination rate, and also that, when so many people get infected, then they're not going to get infected for at least a few months afterwards. So, but there's a question here we talked about a little bit before we recorded the show today, is you've got tons. I don't know the numbers. I don't know if there's any type of, NGO or that's keeping track of undocumented people who don't have their migratory status in order. Okay. Right. Whether it's because they're undocumented or illegal immigrants, or they're people who have come in and are changing their migratory status. They're in the process of getting residency. And in Bolivia and anywhere in the world, that can take months, if not longer. And so, talking to a friend of mine last night, who's been in Bolivia since January, and his residency is in he's in the process, but he doesn't have. Here's the thing: to get vaccinated in Bolivia, you need one of two things. You either need your national ID card, which every Bolivian citizen has,
right? Or
you need to have, if you're a resident, a foreign resident, you need to have your foreign resident ID. Excuse me, which is provided by the same office.
Right.
So if you don't have one or the other, you're SOL. You're not getting vaccinated. And I've got this friend who's, it's been months and he's still waiting on his ID card. He's 50 something years old. He's like, I can't get vaccinated because I don't have this card. He's like, you could go to any vaccination point. There, the lines aren't long anymore. You can go and there's 3 or 4 or 10 people there, or whatever, but it's not a line, 2 blocks long. But and he's not the only one. All these Venezuelans that you see on the streets, at roundabouts and at the traffic lights, asking for money or washing windshields or selling candy or whatever. And at the door at the supermarket, there's thousands. We saw in the headlines the other day this case of 200 Haitian immigrants that were kind of stranded in Pailon. Pailon is a town a few kilometers outside of Santa Cruz. They were basically stranded there by coyotes that lied and told them they were in Peru. And so they'd come in from Brazil and they left them there because I guess there was some police checkpoint or something. And they were afraid to try to get them past there. And so they leave 200 Haitian undocumented immigrants stranded in this BFE, not BFE, but this little podunk town outside of Santa Cruz. And again, how many people are in situations like this? They're probably multiple sleeping in the same room. There's no social distancing or biosecurity or whatever you want to call it. None of these measures being taken. And this is an extremely vulnerable segment of the population. Maybe not the documented population, but they're here, they're among us. These are people that are probably also malnourished, not in the best physical condition. Their immune system is weakened because they're not getting proper sleep or rest or nutrition again. And so they're definitely probably more at risk. And, their health is at risk, and so is everybody else's who hasn't been vaccinated. And so, I'm kind of rambling here, but the point is at this point, why isn't the Bolivian government saying, okay, we've got this huge supply of vaccines, and it's not an issue anymore. It's not an issue of whether or not, we can cover the demand of the documented population. Why aren't they just saying, you want a vaccine, go get it at this point?
It's a good point. Okay. Yeah, I think you're right. There's no question about that. I was just going to pose some interesting points of view because it's happening. It's happening in other countries. I know of a case.
I'm sure it is.
Because I stumbled over this case in my work. There were like 5 Bolivians in Chile, engineers.
Okay.
And they were temporarily in Chile.
Okay.
They went there because they had to do a job.
They were there like on a work visa.
And no, they were in a tourist visa, which is stupid, but they were in a tourist.
Okay.
The company that sent them is it's a transnational, and it's a very important transnational in the world, but they don't want to hassle, I guess, with this visa stuff. So they just got them into the plane and send them as tourists. So when they got to Chile, they were tourists, and they're not earning money in Chile from a Chilean source.
Yeah, I get it.
They're just staying in a hotel.
It's the same thing in the States. There's the tourist, there's the tourist visa, there's the B1 and the B2 or something. So but basically it's the same visa process. Whether you're coming here for work, you're not being paid inside the States. You're being paid from a company outside. So it's the same thing. I get it.
These guys got into the middle of the situation of the problem, because all of a sudden there's a number of people suffering from COVID in Santiago, and that's why I know the case, because I was called for it and said what to do. And they couldn't get vaccinated in Chile because they didn't have the correct visa. They were not there as residents, or they were not there as whatever. They were just tourists. And they couldn't go to the authorities and say, we're working here, because they were working. Okay. And they couldn't go to the authority because they were there like for 2 months or 3 months. They couldn't go to the authorities and say, we're tourists, we're visiting Santiago. No, that was a lie. Not a lie. So they decided not to look for authorities. So they just decided to hide in the hotel, because it wouldn't be inoculated. And something like that happened also in Bogota, because there was a Bolivian guy working there under the same conditions, and couldn't get inoculated because he was not there with legally, they have tourist visas, but tourist visas are not sustainable when you're there for a long time and cannot really demonstrate that you're a tourist, So they didn't get inoculated. And what's happening in Bolivia is absurd. Yeah, you're right.
Well, it seems I can't believe that I don't have a lot of faith in most government officials in the Ministry of Health or in other ministries. under this administration or the previous one, or any for that matter. But it's really hard for me to believe. I mean, they're also not, they can't be that stupid, you know? Again, going back to like, this is not anything that takes a great amount of intellectual or capacity or intelligence. It's in whose best interest is it to prevent these people from getting vaccinated? Well, on the contrary, it's bad for everybody.
Sure.
It's bad for the undocumented immigrants. It's bad for Bolivian citizens. It's bad for the Bolivian government, because they're going to look bad when these people start getting sick and trying to go to hospitals. It's bad for the hospital workers. Nobody wins by denying these people vaccines.
But I think we're all learning. Everybody's learning here. Who sells these vaccines? When you go buy to the market, you go buy to the lab in Moscow, which is, I don't remember the name of the lab, but basically it's the government in Russia. You go and you sign a contract. When you go to China, you go to Shino or whatever, and you sign a contract with that. When you go to the States, you go and sign a contract with Moderna and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So those contracts have clauses. And for example, one of the clauses of all contracts, whether it's Chinese, Russian, or American, or whatever, one of the clauses is that you cannot say how much you paid for it. That's a confidentiality clause. Yeah. There could be a clause where this issue is also talked about. The buyer would have the obligation to inoculate, everybody in the territory, whether he is a national, a foreigner, legal or illegal. And I think that it should be, because at the beginning I was thinking while you were talking that this should be, and it could still be, the United Nations or the OAS, for example, in the case of the Americas, that you intervene and say something about it, in terms of, hey, governments of the Americas, you inoculate everybody, because it's good. What you just stated, it's good for everybody, not only for the inoculated guy, it's good for the whole population. Right. So that could be a task of the OAS in the meantime, well, it's not a law or a contract. But then after that, contract must have that, because you can do through contractual agreements those things. That's where there's a confidentiality clause. Nobody says how much it costs because it's prohibited. Then again, you can sign the contract and say, hey, you have to inoculate everybody that comes in your territory. Anybody, you don't care whether he is black, white, national or international, whatever, Yeah, but it's good to discuss the issue, see, because governments are doing whatever they think is best, or I don't know why they do these things, because as you said, it doesn't take too much intelligence to reach the conclusion that everybody has to be inoculated. So whatever the reason they're doing this, it's not a good reason. So yeah, it's good to discuss it. It's good to push the idea that those are bad limitations, but it's also important for international authorities such as the United Nations or the OAS, and it's important that the seller takes this into account, because the seller has a lot to do about these things. They can write contracts in order to obligate.
It's also probably in their best. It's also in the seller's best interest.
Sure.
The more they're increasing they're increasing the vaccine pool, the eligible population, let's say.
Sure. So, and it's a human rights issue. Again, we're talking about. Okay. Yeah, it's such an important issue that it is human rights. It's basically the right of being to life. If a government tells you cannot be inoculated because you are not legally in that country, they are restraining you from a human right, which is the right to live, the right to survive under COVID, under the COVID invasion in the world. So countries should not have the right to say somebody that cannot inoculate him because he's a foreigner that is not legally in that country. No, definitely, yeah. Under any angle of the analysis, you reach that final conclusion. You are attempting against the life of the people that are not being inoculated, and that's violating the basic human rights of the people. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, in these past couple of weeks, with the supply, the amount of vaccines available having increased so dramatically, I find it hard to believe that we'd be the only people who would be thinking about this. I hope it's already discussion. At official levels where they can, change course, because it's just ridiculous. But anyway.
No, good. And you brought it up. I think it's a very important issue. Whether we're talking about 100 people or 100,000 people, it doesn't matter. It's lives.
Yeah.
We cannot, under democracies, under regimes that say that they're defending human rights, hey, nobody can prohibit any third party not to inoculate himself because you're attempting against his life, and the lives of others, No, that was an excellent point. I never thought about it when we just planned to discuss it in those terms, but really, it's a very important issue.
What it comes down to. All righty, sir. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up for this week. And
I think so, definitely. Yep.
And have a great weekend. Everybody else have a great weekend too.
Enjoy.
Until next time.
All right.
Thanks. Bye-bye.